February 14, 1862, the day of the Iron Valentine. This is when the Confederate gunners are writing "Love and Kisses, Gideon Pillow" and shooting on the balls and shooting them down range, and the Federals were doing the same thing back in this direction. To show you how wide the Cumberland River was, we're now in the Cumberland River, was at the time of the battle. See where the marker buoy is there? That would have been the right bank of the Cumberland River at the time. So it's only slightly larger now, thanks to TBA, than it was back then. And Cumberland's always been the smaller of the two rivers, Tennessee and Cumberland River. You're going to have 4 city-class ironclads approaching in line abreast. Each of those boats is 52 feet wide, 175 feet long. So if you put 4 boats in line abreast, it's basically a game of bumper cars. There's no maneuvering. You're coming on, and you either win together or die together is basically what you've got. You don't turn around because your stern is not armored.
How about the current here? Does that have a effect?
Well, yeah, big effect, because they're coming up at 7 knots, the current's moving about 5, so they're basically at a crawl. Because the current's flowing that way from all the rainwater and everything. You got flooding opposite that way. I always get asked what Confederates are on that side of the river. Scott's 1st Louisiana Cavalry is picketing between here and Clarksville, which is 28 miles. So you've got, that's all the Confederate troops that are on that side of the river. All the rest of them are basically here. You've got 3 regiments that are here in Clarksville, and they are short, heavy artillerists. You've got a number of light batteries that will show up, including Reuben Ross, who's also from Clarksville. He will show up with the Murray Light Artillery from Murray County. He tried to raise a regiment in Clarksville and failed. He was a West Pointer trained gunner, so he went down to Murray County, raised a battery, brought them here, and they said, basically, we have enough light artillery, we need some heavy gunners. So they put him in command of the upper battery, which is the battery that we saw coming in. Upper meaning upstream, lower battery meaning downstream. It's not geographically higher. Actually, this battery's higher than that battery is. That battery will contain 1 6.5-inch rifled Columbiad, exact same gun as the 10-inch smoothbore Columbiad down in the end, except it's bored differently. You got rifle boring, smoothbore boring. The tube is exactly the same size. You have 2 32-pound naval carronades. For Fort Donelson's purposes, the naval carronade is a completely useless weapon. In the days of the wooden warships, when you're getting ready to clash your warship with the enemy warship, you loaded your carronades on the top deck with scrap metal and you fired it over to slaughter the crew of the other ship. So that way, when you boarded the ship, there were a lot of their guys dead and wounded lying on the decks, and you could hopefully win a victory. Now, it would have been great if the United States Marine Corps were coming up here in landing craft and dropped their ramps right there. The carronades are right there. To my knowledge, they fire no shots at all during the entire battle because there's nothing for them to do. They're too short range, and they're not going to punch a hole in an ironclad. So what do they do to come up with manpower to man these heavy batteries? Starting around the 9th and 10th of February, they will start taking infantrymen and training them how to use these 32-pound guns. The concept between firing a musket and a 32-pound gun is absolutely the same. They load almost virtually identically down through the muzzle. The only difference is you have to cover your vent at the back to prevent oxygen from coming through. And then you load your gun, you put your friction primer in, you adjust your screw, you adjust your pivot, and you put your sight on the end of the barrel. You do your range. Thank you. You do your range estimation, and then you fire your gun and you reload it. So they get about 3 to 4 days worth of actual training on the 32-pound guns. The first 4 guns that you're going to have, this is gun number 4, 3, 2, 1. There's your other 3 gun pits right there. Are manned by Company A, the 50th Tennessee Infantry. The entire company is from Clarksville, Tennessee. The next 4 guns, 5, 6, 7, 8, are manned by Company A, the 30th Tennessee, from Springfield, Tennessee. And then you've got heavy artillerymen manning the 10-inch smoothbore and then the 6.5-inch rifled Columbiad down there. Now, what these guys would do is, unlike your common infantryman in the Civil War who was given virtually no training in range estimation, basically they stand shoulder to shoulder and throw as much lead out downrange as quickly as they possibly can, and most of the time they're missing what they're shooting at, particularly if they're firing a rifle musket, because a rifle bullet fires what's called a parabolic curve. It comes out of the musket because of the spin, actually increases in height and then drops down. A smoothbore gun fires a completely flat trajectory at a higher muzzle velocity. Both a musket had a higher muzzle velocity and a cannon has a higher muzzle velocity and fires a true flat trajectory. So what the artillerymen are taught is range estimation, and to help them out is they go downstream on a skiff with some buckets of paint, and at 300-400 yards they'll paint hash marks on the sides of trees. They'll go down another couple hundred yards, paint more hash marks, and then they'll practice aiming at those hash marks. So they learn this is how we have to have our gun at 400 yards, at 600 yards, at 800 yards, or in the case of the 2 big guns, at 1.5 miles to 2 miles. So these guys will actually do something that most infantrymen of the war never do, and learn range estimation, sight adjustment, things of that nature that modern troops are taught in pretty much every army in the world. So they get pretty well drilled, and in fact they're going to do quite a bit of damage to the federal gunboats when the federal gunboats come around the corner. So Grant's plan here is going to be the same as it was at Fort Henry. Get the Navy on the river, hopefully subdue the fort here, and then he is going to bring his troops around from the outskirts that way and hopefully not have to assault the fort. Because if the gunboats get by here, they get down to the Dover Hotel, which is about where the bridge is, and that's the Confederate supply head. If they cut off the line of supply, it's just a matter of time before the garrison is starved out and has to surrender. He's not planning on launching infantry assaults or anything like that. It's going to be up to the Navy to do that. So on the 12th of February, now keep in mind, a couple of his gunboats got really badly beat up over at Fort Henry, and they'll be replaced by other gunboats on this phase of the campaign. You're going to have the USS St. Louis, the USS Louisville, and the USS Pittsburgh. The only one that was at Fort Henry was the Donelson, and it was prepared enough where they could put it back into action for this part. So downstream, about 2 miles, the river curves to the right, curves to the left, and if you look straight at that bunch of trees there, that was where the Union were dropping off their reinforcements. And Grant was getting reinforcements constantly. And how can the Confederates tell when they're getting reinforcements? What does a steamboat kick up into the air? Black smoke. So when you see columns of black smoke moving this way and then they stop, and more columns of black smoke moving to the same area and then stopping, they're dropping off troops and supplies and whatever else that you need there. So finally, they'll actually, on the morning of the 14th, the 6.5-inch rifle gun zeroes in on the smoke and lobs a shell downrange, and the next thing you see is the smoke column starting to disperse. They found us. We better do something. We better get these steamboats out of the way. Except for another column of smoke, groups of columns of smoke, that one by one start popping around the bend, and here come the ironclads, ready to do battle on February 14th. Now the weather has changed at Fort Donelson the night of the 13th and 14th. As Grant's troops are marching over, it's actually going to be in the high 50s and low 60s. The night of the 13th and 14th, the storm front moves in. They're getting 3 inches of sleet and ice and everything else, and all of their winter gear is down the road. They dropped it off because it's too much to carry. So and if you, when I show you the outer positions here, you don't get to build campfires unless you want to draw the artillery of the other side wanting to try to kill you, or sharpshooters trying to kill you. So you huddle together and basically froze. It'll get down to towards 0.
Wow.
For the next couple of days in this campaign. A complete weather change. It's kind of like we had her about 3 weeks ago. Where we replicate. I told my wife, it'd be great to come over here to Dover, except we can't get here. There's 4 inches of ice and sleet on the road, so we can't get over here. Kind of looked like what this would have looked like at the time. So the weather changes on the night of the 13th and 14th. So it's bitterly cold. And on the 12th, the Donelson shows up on stream, fires some balls at the fort here to try to provoke a response. Because again, they don't know what the Confederates have here. They've gotten 0 reconnaissance on this post. And Pillow forbids the gunners to fire back. But what that does is the echoing of gunfire on the river tells Grant that the Navy's on site. So his plan's starting to fall into place. On the 13th, Donelson comes upstream again, and this time begins a general engagement of the water batteries, and Pillow will allow the 10-inch and the 6.5-inch rifle gun to fire back. And on the 3rd or 4th round from the 10-incher, again a loud metal clang, which means the Donelson's been struck. They've got the range, they start zeroing in on that. The Donelson guns, because we're uphill, we're about 100+ feet above the river, so when you're sighting down the barrel of your gun through the gun ports, they're overcompensating for shooting uphill, and they're shooting so far up here, all the balls are going way over and landing in the valleys between here and the town of Dover. About 9 years ago, where the county courthouse is, they were building a new parking lot down in the gully below it, and they dug up a beautiful 8-inch ball from one of the ironclads. It's another mile that way. So they weren't damaging the water batteries here like they were over at Fort Henry, because you had a flat trajectory here, and the guns at Fort Henry played into the strengths of the ironclad, a sloping casemate armor. We could have ricochet effect. Well, here the guns are going to be favoring the Confederates more than they are the Federals, because you have what's called plunging fire. Not only is only the front and a part of amidships of these ironclads covered with iron plate, the roofs are completely unarmored. The guys in the first 4 guns here also learned that you can skip 32-pound cannonballs on the river if you get your angle of deflection right. So like we would skip stones growing up, they're skipping 32-pound balls. What I wouldn't give to be here to watch that one happen. That must have been amazing. And it will actually damage a couple of the gunboats, because on the skip the ball will come up and puncture the hull below the armor plate. Now if you go to see the Cairos, I said to some people earlier, the Cairo you see now at Vicksburg is retrofitted after the Naval Battle of Memphis of June of 1862, where they took the defects of the ironclads and did a retrofit. They changed the vertical armored pillbox to a casemate slope pillbox. They added railroad iron between the midships armor and the bow armor, and then they added armor plate below the hull because of the punctured hulls here. Because one of the boats is going to start to sink, and the pumps are barely able to keep the water out of the hull. So we almost lost one of the gunboats here. These boats are not invulnerable. They're designed to take these things on, but they can be sunk and damaged very badly, as they will be. So as Pillow had nothing to do with this. As Foote brings his gunboats forward, he's telling his gunners to fire measured pace of rounds because he does not have a lot of heavy ordnance for his 8-inch guns. When one gunner on one of the ships, he signals over like, slow down your pace of fire. We have to do this very methodically because we run out of ammo. We got to go all the way back to Paducah to pick up some more. That's going to be a couple days down, a couple days back, and that's not going to make Grant very happy. One of the pilot boxes gets penetrated, and Foote's going to get wounded there because of the splinter effect. If you've seen the movie Master and Commander, that's a pretty accurate depiction of what happens when a hull of a ship, even if you've got iron plate, the wood splinters, that becomes shrapnel. That'll kill you just as much as getting struck by the ball itself, and Foote will become wounded in the engagement. So as they close up, Foote decides that he wants to close in like he did at Fort Henry, and when he gets to about 800 yards, actually 7 of the 8 of these guns will roar into action and start dinging the armor. On the 13th, as Carondelet is withdrawing, it fires one last shot and dismounts this gun right here, killing Lieutenant Joseph Dixon, the man that was helping to build Fort Henry. A piece of the gun equipment came off, hit him in the head, and killed him right there. So that gun is going to be out of action. So you got the 7.32s and then the 10-inch and the 6.5-inch rifle. Imagine the sound of the roar of these cannon, which they heard in Nashville, by the way, and in Clarksville. The thunder of the guns carrying on the river, the blood pouring out of the ears of these gunners because of perforated eardrums and things of that nature. You can imagine what it was like on board the actually, even on the gun decks, it wasn't too bad because your gun muzzle is actually outside of the casemate and sound goes in the direction that it's aimed, so it wasn't as loud for them as it was here. The gun's going into action. Finally, what happens over here, because you have a rifle piece of artillery, the problem with rifling in the day of black powder, even with a musket, is the powder will cake up inside the grooves, which means you have to stop, pour water down it, get your sponge, not your sponge, your worm, it's called, and scrape the powder out, which means you're no longer firing the gun until you can get it clean. So they're doing that, and then they get the vent prick stuck in it again, and that disables the gun for a time. The two Columbiads here and at Fort Henry have carriage problems. The recoil on these things is so powerful. 128-pound shells, 60 pounds of powder, that in the morning fight on the 13th, it actually dislodged the carriage. It broke the pintle, which is the pivot bar when the gun pivots like this. In the middle of every one of these things at the front is a thing called the pintle that goes straight down to the ground, and that's what you pivot on. So they sent an officer down to the Clarksville foundry with the broken pintle and says, I need one of these tomorrow. And he brought back a new pintle, and they managed to get it put in just before the day of the Iron Valentines actually takes place. But the carriage has been so damaged by the recoil, the gun has limited traverse, so it means it can't go left and right, it can go up and down. So unless it's got a gunboat right in front of it, it's not going to really do much of hitting anything. But as they close in, the 32 pounders, as I said, take over and really start to ding the gunboats. You get the bouncing of the balls, puncture the holes, you get casemates penetrated, the open gun ports are pretty wide, get pretty wide, balls will go through there. In fact, the gun commanders, the way they do is they're looking out as these guys are working their piece, and if they see a ball coming, which gets progressively bigger, and they think it's coming to the port, they'll say, okay, it's going to come in the left side. So left section hit the deck, and essentially the ball is supposed to go through and then roll down the gun deck and hopefully not hit anybody. Well, one guy didn't hear the drop order and took his head right off, so the head and the ball rolled down the gun deck. And of course you've got blood building up there, so what do? You bring up sand so guys can keep their traction, and as they will do at Fort Henry, they're rotating their gun crews in and out. So they have fresh gunners out there, they do not have the fresh gunners here. So one by one the gunboats get dinged up. Two of them will get jammed together and get interlocked. The rudder system of one, which is a chain system, comes out of the back of the casemate, gets severed, so he no longer has steerage, and you don't turn them around because A, you can't, there's no room, and B, you don't want to show your unarmored stern to guys that are already punching holes in your armor. So you cut your power and you let the current take you back, firing your bow guns as long as you can. Finally, the last gunboat here will be the Caron de Lay. It'll be